Chapter 5. The Dementor. Tom woke Harry the next morning with his usual toothless grin and a cup of tea. Harry just pursuing a disgruntled Hedwig to get back into her cage when Ron banged his way into the room. Pulling a sweatshirt over his head and looking irritable, the sooner we get on the train, the better, he said at last. I can get away from Percy at Hogwarts. Now he is accusing me for dropping tea on his photo of people Clearwater. Ron Glim, his girlfriend, she is hidden her face under the frame because her nose has gone all blotchy. I have got something to tell you, Harry began, but they were interrupted by Fred and George, who had looked in to congratulate Ron on incorporating Percy again. They headed down to breakfast where Mr. Weasley was reading the front page of Daily Prophet with the furrowed brow of Mrs. Weasley, who was telling Hermione and Ginny about a love potion she had made as a young girl. All three of them were rather giggled. What were you saying? Ron asked. Harry, as they sat down later, Harry muttered as Percy stormed in. Harry had no chance to speak to Ron and Hermione. In the chaos of living, they were too busy having all their trunks down the leaky cauldron's narrow staircase and piling them up near the door. The Hedwig and Herman Percy Screech Owl perched on top of their cage. A small wicker basket stood beside the heap of trunk, spitting loudly. It's all right, Crookshanks, Harmony called through the wide rock. I'll let you out on the train. You won't snap Ron. What about pure scabbard? He pointed at his chest where a large lump I indicate that scabbard was curled up in his pocket. Mr. Weasley, who had been outside waiting for the ministry's car, stuck his head inside. They're here, he said. Harry, come on. Mr. Weasley marched Harry across the short stretch of pavement toward the first of two old-fashioned dark green cars, each of which was driven by the furtive-looking wizard wearing a suit of emerald velvet. In you get, Harry, said Mr. Weasley, glancing up and down the crowded street. Harry got into the black car and was shortly joined by Hermione, Ron, and to Ron's discuss Percy. The journey to King's Cross was very uneventful compared with Harry's trip on the night bus, but Ministry of Magic cars seemed almost ordinary through Harry's notice that they could slide through gaps that Uncle Vernon's new company car certainly couldn't have managed. They reached King's Cross with 20 minutes to spare. The ministry driver found them trolley unloaded their trunk, touched their hats in salute to Mr. Weasley, and drove away, somehow managing to jump to the head of an unmoving line in the traffic light. Mr. Weasley kept close to Harry's elbow all the way into the station. Right then, he said, glancing around them, let's do this in pair as there are so many of us. I'll go through the first, Harry. Mr. Weasley strolled toward the barrier between platform 9 and 10, pushing Harry's trolley and apparently very interested in the Intercity 125 that had just arrived at platform 9. With a meaningful look at Harry, he leaned casually against the barrier. Harry imitated him. In a moment, they had fallen sideways through the solid metal into platform 9 and 3/4 and looked up to see the Hogwarts Express, a scarlet steam engine puffing smoke over a platform packed with witches and wizards, seeing their children into trains. Percy and Ginny suddenly appeared behind Harry. They were panting and had apparently taken the barrier at the run. Oh, there is Penelope, said Percy, smoothing his hair and going pink again. Ginny caught Harry's eye and they both turned away to hide their laughter as Percy strode over to a girl with long curly hair, walking with his chest throughout so that he couldn't miss his shiny badge. Once the remaining Weasley and Hermione had joined them, Harry and Ron led the way to the end of the train, past packed compartment to the carriage that looked quite empty. They loaded the trunk onto it, stowed Hedwig and Crookshank in the luggage rack, then went back outside to say goodbye to Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. Mrs. Weasley kissed all her children, then Hermione and finally Harry. He was embarrassed but really quite pleased when she gave him an extra hug. "Do take care, won't you, Harry?" she said as she straightened up, her eyes oddly bright. Then she opened her enormous handbag and said, "I have made you all sandwiches here. You are Ron." "No, they are not corned beef, Fred." "Where is Fred?" "Here you are, dear," Harry said. "Mr. Weasley quietly came over here a moment." He jerked his head toward the pillar and Harry followed him behind it, leaving the others crowded around Mr. Weasley. "There is something I have to tell you before you leave," said Mr. Weasley in a tense voice. "It's all right, Mr. Weasley," said Harry. "I already know. You know. How could you? I heard you and Mrs. Weasley talking last night." "I couldn't help hearing," Harry added quickly. "Sorry, that's not the way I had have chosen for you to find out," said Mr. Weasley, looking anxious. "No, honestly, it's okay. This way, you haven't broke your word to Fudge and I know what's going on." "Harry, you must be very scared." "I'm not," said Harry sincerely. "Really," he added, because Mr. Weasley was looking disbelieving. "I'm not trying to be a hero, but sincerely, Cyrus Black can't be worse than Voldemort, can he?" Mr. Weasley flinched at the sound of the name, but overloaded it. "Harry, I knew you were well made of stronger stuff than first seemed to think, and I am obviously pleased that you are not scared, but Arthur," called Mrs. Weasley, who was now spearheading the rest into the school. "Arthur, what are you doing?" "It's about to go." "He's coming, Molly," said Mr. Weasley, but he turned back to Harry and kept talking in a lower and more hurried voice. "Listen, I want you to give me your word that I'll be a good boy and stay in the castle," said Harry gloomily. "Not entirely," said Mr. Weasley, looked more serious than Harry and ever seen him. "Harry, swear to me, won't go looking for Black." Harry stared. "What?" There was a loud whistle. Guards were walking along the train, slamming all the doors shut. "Promise me, Harry," said Mr. Weasley, talking more quietly still. "That's whatever happens." "Why would I go looking for someone I know wants to kill me?" said Harry blankly. "Swear to me that whatever you might hear," Arthur quickly cried Mrs. Weasley. Steam was billowing from the train. He had started to move. Harry ran to compartment door and Ron threw it open and stood back to let him on. They leaned out of the window and waved at Mr. and Mrs. Weasley until the train turned a corner and blocked them from view. "I need to talk to you in a private," Harry muttered to Ron and Hermione as the train picked up speed. "Go away, Ginny," said Ron. "Oh, that's nice," said Ginny huffily, and she stalked off. Harry, Ron, and Hermione set off down the corridor, looking for an empty compartment, but all were full, except for the one at the very end of the train. This had only one occupant, a man sitting fast asleep next to a window. Harry, Ron, and Hermione checked on the threshold. The Hogwarts Express was usually reserved for students, and they had never seen an adult there before, except for the witch who pushed the food cart. The stranger was wearing an extremely shabby set of wizard's robe that had been darned in several places. He looked ill and exhausted, though quite young. His light brown hair was flecked with grey. "Who had you reckon he is?" said Hist as they sat down and slid the door shut, taking the seat farthest away from the window. "Professor Argel Lupin," whispered Harmony at once. "How do you know?" "It's on his case," she replied, pointing at the luggage rack over the man's head, where there was a small battered case held together with a large quantity of neatly knotted string. The name Professor R.J. Lupin was stamped across one corner in peeling leather. Wonder what he teaches, said Ron, throwing at Professor Lupin's pale profile. That's obvious, whispered Hermione. There is only one vacancy, isn't there? Defense against the dark art. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had already had two defense against the dark art teacher, both of whom had lasted only 1 year. There were rumors that the job was cinched. Well, I hope he's up to it, said Ron doubtfully. He looked like one good hex will finish him off, doesn't he? Anyway, he turned to Harry. What were you going to tell us? Harry explained all about Mr. and Mrs. Weasley's argument and the warning Mr. Weasley had just given him. When he had finished, Ron looked thunderstruck, and Hermione had her hand over her mouth. She finally lowered them to say, Cyrus Black escaped to come after you. Oh, Harry, you'll have to be really, really careful. Don't go looking for trouble, Harry. I don't go looking for trouble, said Harry nately. Trouble usually finds me. How thick would Harry have to be to go looking for a nutter who wants to kill him, said Ron shakily. They were talking the news worse than Harry had expected. Both Ron and Hermione seemed to be much more frightened of Black than he was. No one knows how he got out of Azkaban, said Ron uncomfortably. No one ever done it before, and he was the top security prisoner too. But they'll catch him one day, said Hermione earnestly. I mean, they have got all the muggle looking out for him too. What's that noise? Said Ron suddenly. A faint, tiny sort of whistle was coming from somewhere. They looked all around the compartment. It's coming from your trunk, Harry, said Ron, standing up and reaching into luggage rack. A moment later, he had pulled the pocket snake out of between Harry's robe. It was spinning very fast in the palm and drawn hand and glowing brightly. Is that a snake scope? Said Hermione interestedly, standing up for a better look. Yeah, mind you, it's a very cheap one, Ron said. It went high wire just as I was trying it 2 years late to send it to Harry. Were you doing anything untrustworthy at the time? Said Hermione shrewdly. No, well, I wasn't supposed to be using Yerol. You know, he's not really up to long journeys, but how else was I supposed to get Harry's present to him? Stick it back in the trunk, Harry advised, as the snake scope whistled piercingly, or it will wake him up. He nodded toward Professor Lupin. Ron stuffed the snake scope into the particular horrible pair of Uncle Vernon's old socks, which then the sound when closed the lid of the trunk on it. We could get it checked in Hogsmeade, said Ron, sitting Black down. They'll sell the sort of thing in Darvish and Banjes, magical instrument and stuff, Fred and George told me. Do you know much about Hogsmeade? Asked Hermione keenly. I have read it, the only entirely non-Muggle settlement in Britain. Yeah, I think it is, said Ron in an offhand sort of way, but that's not why I want to go. I just want to get inside. Honey duck, what is that? Said Hermione. It's this sweatshop, said Ron in a dreamy look coming over his face, where they have got everything. Papers, lamps, they make you smoke at the mouth, and great fat cocoa balls full of strawberry mosses and cloth cream, and really excellent sugar quills which you can suck in a glass and just look like you are thinking what you write next. But Hogsmeade is a very interesting place, isn't it? Hermione pressed on eagerly. In sight of historical sources, it says the inn was the headquarters for the 1612 Goblin Rebellion, and the shrinking stakes supposed to be the most severely haunted building in Britain, and massive sherbet balls that make you levitate a few inches off the ground while you are sucking them, said Ron, who was plainly not listening to a word Hermione was saying. Hermione, looking around at Harry, Won't it be nice to get out of the school for a bit and explore Hogsmeade? Expect it will be, said Harry heavily. You'll have to tell me when you have found out. What do you mean? Said Ron. I can't go. The Dursleys didn't sign my permission form and Fudge wouldn't either. Ron looked horrified. You are not allowed to come, but no way. McGonagall or someone will give you permission. Harry gave a hollow laugh. Professor McGonagall, head of Gryffindor House, was very strict. Or we can ask Fred and George. They know every secret passage out of the castle. Ron said Hermione sharply, I don't think Harry should be sneaking out of school with a black on the loose lip. I expect that what McGonagall will say when I ask for permission, said Harry bitterly. But if we are with him, said Ron spiritedly to Hermione, Black wouldn't dare. Oh Ron, don't talk rubbish, snapped Hermione. Black already murdered a whole bunch of people in the middle of crowd street. Do you really think he is going to worry about attacking Harry just because we are here? She was fumbling with the strap of Crookshank basket as she spoke. Don't let that thing out, Ron said. But too late, Crookshank leapt lightly from the basket, stretched yawned, and sprang into Ron's teeth. The lump in Ron's pocket tumbled and he shoved Crookshank angrily away. Get out of here, Ron, don't, said Hermione angrily. Ron was about to answer back when Professor Lupin stared. They watched him apprehensively, but they simply turned his head the other way, mouth slightly open, and slipped on. The Hogwarts Express moved steadily north, and the scenery outside the window became wilder and darker while the cloud overhead thickened. People were chasing backward and forward past the door of their compartment. Roshank had now settled in an empty seat, his square face turned toward Ron, his yellowish eyes on Ron's top pocket. At 1 o'clock, the plump witch with a food cart arrived at the compartment door. Do you think we should wake him up? Ron asked awkwardly, nodding toward Professor Lupin. He looks like he could do with some food. Hermione approached Professor Lupin cautiously. Professor, she said. Excuse me, Professor. He didn't move. Don't worry, dear, said Witch as she handed Harry a large sack of cauldron cake. If he is hungry, when he wakes, I'll be up front with the driver. I suppose he is asleep, said Ron quietly as the witch slid the compartment door closed. I mean, he hasn't died, has he? No, no, he's breathing, whispered Harmony, talking the cauldron cake Harry passed her. He might not be very good company, but Professor Lupin's presence in their compartment had its uses. Mid-afternoon, just as it had started to rain, burying the trolling hills outside the window, they heard footsteps in the corridor again, and their three least favorite people appeared at the door. Draco Malfoy, flanked by his cronies Vincent Gabby and George Rigo. Draco Malfoy and Harry had been enemies ever since they had met on their very first day on train journey to Hogwarts. Malfoy, who had a pale point sneering face, was Slytherin's house. He played Seekers on the Slytherin Quidditch team, the same position the Harry played on the Gryffindor's team. Grab and Goyle seemed to exist to the Malfoy bidding. They were both wide and muscly. Grab was taller, with a pudding bowl haircut and a very thick neck. Goyle had short bristly hair and long gorilla arm. Well, look who it is, said Malfoy in his usual lazy drawl, pulling open the compartment door. Forty and Weasley. Grab and Goyle chuckled throttlously. I heard your father finally got his hand off some good this summer, Weasley, said Malfoy. Did your mother die of shock? Ron stood up so quickly he knocked Crookshank's basket to the floor. Professor Lupin gave a snort. Who is that? Said Malfoy, taking an automatic step backward as he spotted Lupin. New teacher, said Harry, who got on his feet too, in case he needed to hold Ron back. What were you saying, Malfoy? Malfoy's pale eye narrowed. He wasn't fool enough to put a fight right under a teacher's nose. Where are you? He muttered, resentful to grab and Goyle, and they disappeared. Harry and Ron sat down again, and Ron massaging his knuckles. I'm not going to take any crap from Malfoy this year, he said angrily. I mean it. If he make one more crack about my family, I'm going to get hold of his head. And Ron made a violent gesture in midair. Ron hissed Hermione, pointing at Professor Lupin, be careful. But Professor Lupin was still fast asleep. The rain thickened as the train sped yet farther north. The windows were now a solid, seemingly grey, with gradually darkened until lantern flickered into life all along the corridor and over the luggage rack. The train rattled, the train hammered, the wind roared, but still Professor Lupin slept. We must be nearly there, said Ron, leaning forward to look past Professor Lupin at the now completely black window. The words had hardly left him when his train started to slow down. Great, said Ron, getting up and walking carefully past Professor Lupin to try and see outside. I'm starving. I want to get to the feast. We can't be there yet, said Harmony, checking her watch. So why we are stopping? The train was getting slower and slower as the noise of the explosion fell away. The wind and rain sounded louder than ever against the window. Harry, who was nearest the door, got up to look into the corridor. All along the carriage head were sticking curiously out of their compartment. The train came to stop with a jolt, and distant thuds and bangs told them that luggage had fallen out of the racks. Without warning, all the lamps went out. They were plunging into total darkness. What's going on? Said Ron's voice from behind. Harry, ouch, gasped Harmony. Ron, that was my foot. Harry felt his way back to his seat. Do you think we have broken down? Oh no. There was a squeaking ground, and Harry saw the dim black outline of Ron whipping a patch clean on a window and peering out. There is something moving out there, Ron said. I think people are coming abroad. Apartment door suddenly opened and someone fell painfully over Harry's leg. Sorry, do you know what's going on? Oh, sorry. Hello, Neville, said Harry, feeling around in the dark and pulling Neville up by his cloak. Harry, is that you? What's happening? No idea, sit down. There was a loud hissing and a yelp of pain. Neville had tried to sit on Crookshanks. I'm going to go and ask the driver what's going on. Come on, Harmony voice. Harry felt her past him, heard the door slide open again, and then third and two loud squeal of pain. Who is that? Who is that? Ginny? Harmony? What are you doing? I was looking for Ron. Come in and sit down. Not here, said Harry hurriedly. I'm here. Ouch, said Neville. Wait, said a hoarse voice suddenly. Professor Lupin appeared to have woken up last. Harry could hear movement in his corner. None of them spoke. There was a soft cracking noise and a shivering light filled the compartment. Professor Lupin appeared to be holding a hatful of flames. They illuminate his tired grey face, but his eyes looked alert and worried. Stay where you are, he said in the same hoarse voice, and he got slowly to his feet with his handful of fire held out of in front of him. But the door slid slowly open before Lupin could reach it. Standing in the doorway, illuminated by the shivering flames in Lupin's hand, was a cloaked figure that toward to the ceiling. Its face was completely hidden beneath its hood. Harry's eye darkened downward, and what he saw made his stomach contract. There was a hand protruding from his cloak, and it was glistening, grayish, slimly looking, and scabbed like something dead that had decayed in water. It was visible only for a split second, as though the creature beneath the cloak had sensed Harry's gaze. The hand was suddenly withdrawn into fold of its black cloak, and then The thing beneath the hood, whatever it was, drew a long, slow, rattling beat as though it was trying to suck something more than air from the surrounding. An intense cold swept over them all. Harry felt his own breath catch in his chest. The cold went deeper than his skin. It was inside his chest, it was inside his very heart. Harry's eyes rolled up into his head. He couldn't see. He was drawing in cold. Where was a rushing on his ear as thousands of water. He was being dragged downward. The roaring growing louder, and then from far away he heard screaming, terrible, terrified, pleading scream. He wanted to help whoever it was. He tried to move his arms but couldn't. A thick white fog was shivering around him, inside him. Hurry, hurry, are you alright? Someone was slapping his face. What? He opened his eyes. There were lanterns above him and the floor was shaking. The Hogwarts Express was moving again and the light had come back on. He seemed to have slid out of his seat onto the floor. Ron and Hermione were kneeling next to him, and above them he could see Neville and Professor Lupin watching. Harry felt very sick when he put up his hand to push his glasses back. Ron felt cold sweat on his face. Ron had Hermione waved them back onto his sweat. Are you okay? Ron asked nervously. Yes, said Harry, looking quietly toward the door. The hooded creature and vanished. What happened? Where is that thing? Who screamed? No one screamed, said Ron. More nervously still, Harry looked around the bright compartment. Ginny and Neville looked back at him, both very pale, but I heard screaming. A loud snap made them all jump. Professor Lupin was breaking an enormous slab of chocolate into pieces. Here, he said to Harry, handing him a particularly large piece. Eat it, it will help. Harry took a chocolate but didn't eat it. What was that thing? He asked Lupin. A Dementor, said Lupin, who was now giving chocolate to everyone else. One of the Dementor of Azkaban. Everyone stared at him. Professor Lupin crumpled up the empty chocolate wrapper and put it in his pocket. Eat, he repeated. It will help. I need to speak to the driver. Excuse me. He strolled past Harry and disappeared into the corridor. Are you sure you are okay, Harry? Said Hermione, watching Harry anxiously. I don't get it. What happened? Said Harry, wiping more sweat off his face. Well, that thing. The Dementor stood there and looked around. I think it did. I couldn't see its face, and you. I thought you were having a fit or something, said Ron, who still looked scared. You went sort of rigid and fell out of your seat and started twitching. And Professor Lupin stepped over you and walked toward the Dementor and pulled out his wand, said Harmony. And he said, none of us is hiding Cyrus Black under our cloak. Go. But the Dementor didn't move, so Lupin muttered something and a silver thing shot out of his wand at it, and it turned around and sort of gliding away. It was horrible, said Neville in a higher voice than usual. Did you feel how cold it got when it came in? I felt weird, said Ron, shifting his shoulder uncomfortably, like I had never been cheerful again. Ginny, who was huddled in her corner, looking nearly as bad as Harry felt, gave a small sob. Harmony went over and put a comforting arm around her. But didn't any of you fall off your seat? Said Harry awkwardly. No, said Ron, looking anxiously at Harry again. Ginny was shaking like a mad though. Harry didn't understand. He felt weak and shivery, as though he were recovering from a bad bout of fly. He also felt the beginnings of shame. Why had he gone to pieces like that when no one else had? Professor Lupin had come back. He paused as he entered, looked around, and said with a small smile, I haven't poisoned that chocolate, you know. Harry took a bite, and to his great surprise, felt warmth spread suddenly to his tips of his fingers and toes. We'll be at Hogwarts in 10 minutes, said Professor Lupin. Are you all right, Harry? Harry didn't ask how Professor Lupin knew his name. Fine, he muttered, embarrassed. They didn't talk much during the remainder of the journey. At long last, the train stopped at Hogsmeade station, and there was a great scramble to get outside. Owl hooted, cat mewed, and Neville Pate Toad croaked loudly from under his hat. It was freezing on the tiny platform. Rain was driving down in icy sheets. First years this way, called a familiar voice. Harry, Ron, and Hermione turned and saw the gigantic outline of Hagrid at the other end of the platform, beckoning the terrified-looking new student to forward a traditional journey across the lake. "All right, you there," Hagrid yelled over the head of the crowd. They waved at him but had no chance to speak to him because the mass of people around them was shouting them away along the platform. Harry, Ron, and Hermione followed the rest of the school along the platform and out into a rough mud track where at last 100 stretchers awaited the remaining student, each pulled Harry could only assume by an invisible horse, because when they climbed inside and shut the door, the coach set off all by itself, bumping and swaying in procession. The cock smelled faintly of mold and stewed. Harry felt better since the chocolate, but still weak. Ron and Hermione kept looking at him sideways as though frightened he might collapse again. As the carriage turned toward a pair of magnificent sword iron gates flanked with stone columns topped with wicket boards, Harry saw two more towering hooded Dementors standing guard on either side. A wave of cold sickness threatened to engulf him again. He leaned backward the limpy seat and closed his eyes until they had passed the gates. The carriage picked up speed on the long, slowing driver up to the castle. Hermione was leaning out of the tiny window, watching the many turnets and towering droners. At last, the carrying sway to a halt, and Hermione and Ron got out. As Harry stepped down, a drawling, delight voice sounded in his ear. "You fainted, Potter." His Longbottom telling the truth. "You actually fainted." Malfoy elbowed past Hermione to block Harry's way up to the stone step to the castle, his face griefly and his pale eyes glittering maliciously. "Show off, Malfoy," said Ron, whose jaw was clenched. "Did you faint as well, Weasley?" said Malfoy loudly. "Did the scary old Dementor frighten you too?" "Weasley, is there a problem?" said a mild voice. Professor Lupin had just gotten out of the next carriage. Malfoy gave Professor Lupin an insulting stare, which took in the patches on his robes and the dissipated suitcase with a tiny hint of skin in his voice. He said, "Oh no, Professor." Then he smiled at Grab and Goyle and led them up to the step into castle. Hermione prodded Ron in the back to make him hurry, and the three of them joined the crowd swearing up the step through the giant oak front door onto the cavernous entrance hall, which was lit with flaming torches and houses of magnificent marble staircase that led the upper floor. The door into the great hall stood open at the right. Harry followed the crowd toward it, but had barely glimpsed the enchanted ceiling, which was black and coldly tonight. When a voice called, "Potter, Granger, I wanted to see you both." Harry and Hermione turned around, surprised. Professor McGonagall, Transfiguration teacher and the head of Gryffindor House, was sailing over the head of the crowd. She was stern-looking witch who wore her hair in the tight bun. Her sharp eyes were framed with square spectacles. Harry fought his way over to her with a feeling of forbidding. Professor McGonagall had a way of making him feel he must have done something wrong. "There is no need to look so worried. I just want to work in my office," she told them. "Move along there, Weasley." Ron stared as Professor McGonagall ushered Harry and Hermione away from the chattering crowd. They accompanied her across the entrance hall, up the marble staircase, and along a corridor. Once they were in her office, a small room with a large welcoming fire. Professor McGonagall motioned Harry and Hermione to sit down. She settled herself behind her desk and said abruptly, Professor Lupin sent an owl ahead to say that you were taken ill on the train, Potter. Before Harry could reply, there was a soft knock on the door and Madame Pomfrey, the nurse, came bursting in. Harry felt himself going red in the face. It was bad enough that he had passed out or whatever he had done without everyone making all the fuss. I'm fine, he said. I don't need anything. Oh, it's you, is it? Said Madame Pomfrey, ignoring this and bending down to stare closely at him. I suppose you have doing something dangerous again. It was a Dementor puppy, said Professor McGonagall. They exchanged a dark look and Madame Pomfrey chuckled disapproving. Setting Dementor around the school, she muttered, pushing back Harry's hair and feeling his forehead. He won't be the last one who collapses. Yes, he'll all calmly. Terrible thing they are, and the effect they have on people who are already delicate. I'm not delicate, said Harry crossly. Of course you are not, said Madame Pomfrey absent-mindedly. Now taking his pulse. What does he need? Said Professor McGonagall crisply. Bed rest. Should he perhaps spend tonight in the hospital wing? I'm fine, said Harry, jumping up. The thought of what Draco Malfoy would say if he had to go to the hospital wing was torture. Well, he should have some chocolate at the very last, said Madame Pomfrey, who was now trying to peer into Harry's eyes. I have already had some, said Harry. Professor Lupin gave me some. He gave it to all us. Did he now? Said Madame Pomfrey approvingly. So we have finally got a defense against dark art teacher who knows his remedies. Are you sure? Feel all right, Potter? Professor McGonagall said sharply. Yes, said Harry. Very well. Kindly wait outside while I have a quick word with Miss Granger about her course schedule. Then we can go down to the feast together. Harry went back into the corridor with Madame Pomfrey, who left for the hospital wing, muttering to herself. He had to wait only a few minutes. Then Hermione emerged looking very happy about something, followed by Professor McGonagall, and the three of them made their way back down the marble staircase to the great hall. It was a sea of pointed black hats. Each of the long house table was lined with students, their faces glimmered by the light of thousands of candles which were floating over the tables in mid-air. Professor Flitwick, who was a tiny little wizard with a shock of white hair, was carrying an ancient hat and a three-legged stool out of the hall. Oh, said Harmony softly, we have missed the sorting. New students at Hogwarts were sorted into houses by trying to the sorting hat. We shouted out the house they were best suited to Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, or Slytherin. Professor McGonagall strode off toward her empty seat at the staff table, and Harry and Hermione set off in the other direction. As quickly as possible toward the Gryffindor table, people looked around at them as they passed along the back of the hall, and a few of them, pointing at Harry, had a story of his collapsing in front of the Dementor traveled that fast. He and Hermione sat down on either side of Ron, who had saved themselves seat. What was all that about? He muttered to Harry. Harry started to explain in a whisper, but at that moment the headmaster stood up to speak and he broke off. Professor Dumbledore, though very old, always gave an impression of great energy. He had several feet of long silver hair and beard, half-moon spectacles, and an extremely crooked nose. He was often described as the greatest wizard in the age, but that wasn't why Harry respected him. You couldn't help trusting Albus Dumbledore, and as Harry watched him beaming around at the students, he felt really calm. For the first time since the Dementor had entered the train compartment. Welcome, said Dumbledore, the candlelight shimmering on his beard. Welcome to another year at Hogwarts. I have a few things to say to you all, and as one of them is very serious, I think it's best to get it out of the way before you become doubly by your excellent feast. Dumbledore cleared his throat and continued, as you will be aware after their search of Hogwarts Express, our school is presently playing host to some of the Dementor of Azkaban who are here on Ministry of Magic's business. He paused as Harry remembered what Mr. Weasley had said about Dumbledore not being happy with the Dementor guarding the school. They are stationed at every entrance to the ground. Dumbledore continued, and while they are with us, I must make it plain that nobody in here to leave school without permission. Dementor are not to be fooled by trick or disgust or even invisibility cloak. He added blandly, and Harry and Ron glanced at each other. It is not in the nature of Dementor to understand pleading or excuses. I therefore want each and every one of you to give them no reason to harm you. I look to the perfects and our new head boy and a girl to make sure that no student run afoul of a Dementor, he said. Percy, who was sitting a few seats down from Harry, puffed out his chest again and started around impressively. Dumbledore paused again. He looked very serious around the hall and nobody moved or made a sound. On a happier note, he continued, I am pleased to welcome two new teachers to our rank this year. First, Professor Lupin, who was kindly consented to fill the post of defense against the dark art teacher. There was some scattered, rather unenthusiastic applause. Only those who had been in the compartment on the train with Professor Lupin clapped hard, Harry among them. Professor Lupin looked particularly shabby next to the other teachers in their best robes. Look at Snape, Ron hissed to Harry's ear. Professor Snape, the potion master, was staring along the staff table at Professor Lupin. It was common knowledge that Snape wanted the defense against the dark arts job, but even Harry, who hated Snape, was startled at the expression twisting his thin, sallow face. It was beyond anger, it was loaded. Harry knew that expression only too well. It was the look Snape wore every time he set eyes on Harry. As for our second new appointment, Dumbledore continued as the warm applause for Professor Lupin died away. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that Professor Kettleburn, our care of magical creature teachers, retired at the end of last year in order to enjoy more time with his remaining limbs. However, I am delighted to say that his place will be filled by none other than Rubius Hagrid, who had agreed to take on the teaching job in addition to his gamekeeper's duty. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stared at one another's stunned. They joined in the applause with the equivalent at the beginning. Harry lifted the Hagrid was Harry, Ron, and Hermione were the last to stop clapping, and as Professor Dumbledore started speaking again, they saw that Hagrid was wiping his eyes on the tablecloth. Well, I think that's everything of importance, said Dumbledore. Let the feast begin. The golden plate and the goblet before them filled suddenly with food and drinks. Harry suddenly renounced help himself to everything he could reach and began to eat. It was a delicious feast, the hall echoed with talk, laughter, and the clatter of knives and forks. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, however, were eager for it to finish so that they could talk to Hagrid. They knew how much being made a teacher would mean to him. Hagrid wasn't a fully qualified wizard. He had been expelled from Hogwarts in his third year for a crime he had not committed. It had been Harry, Ron, and Hermione who had cleared Hagrid's name last year. Last when the last morsel of pumpkin tart had melted from the golden platters, Dumbledore gave the word that it was time for them to go to bed, and they got their chances. Congratulations, Hagrid, Hermione squealed as they reached the teacher's table. All down to three, said Hagrid, wiping his shining face on his napkin as he looked up at them. Can believe it, great man Dumbledore came straight down to meet but after Professor Kettleburn said he had enough. That's what I always wanted. Overcome with emotion, he buried his face in his napkin, and Professor McGonagall shooed them away. Harry, Ron, and Hermione joined the Gryffindor, streaming up the marble staircase and very tired now, along more corridors, up more and more stairs. To the hidden entrance to Gryffindor's tower, a large portrait of a fat lady in pink dress asked them password. Coming through, coming through. Percy called for being the crowd, the new passwords, fortune major. Oh no, said Neville Longbottom sadly. He always had trouble remembering the passwords. Through the portrait hole and across the common room, the girls and boys divide toward their separate staircase. Harry climbed the spiral stair with no thought in his head except how glad he was to back. They reached their familiar circular dormitory with its 5 4 poster bed, and Harry, looking around, felt he was home at last. That's it for today. Stay tuned. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for next chapter. Till then, see ya. Bye bye.